Okay, Julian, I'm going to ask you to please put everybody on mute, and those that need to speak would then go *6 so that this way we don't have any interruptions. Remember, in order to unmute, you must hit *6. This meeting is recorded today. I would like to call this meeting to order. It is June the 25th. I am calling to order the Hartford Subcommittee of the MARB, and the time is 10:06. I'm Kimberly Kennison. I am the designee for Secretary McCaw. With me today is Christine Shaw. She is the designee for Treasurer Wooden. And the only opening remarks that I have this morning is that I hope everybody is healthy, and I will ask the co-chair if she has any opening remarks.
No, nothing specific to add. Thank you, Ms. Kennison.
Thank you, Christine. So we do have a quorum, and why don't we get to the first order of business? And I'm asking for a motion to approve those minutes of May the 7th.
Christine Shaw, so moved.
Thank you. May I get a second, please?
Bob White, so moved. Or seconded, wherever it is.
Thank you. And is there any discussion on the minutes this morning? Julie, may I please have a roll call for the members? And when asking, just inform us whether you are in favor, opposed, or if you would like to abstain from the minutes, and we'll do all of that in one shot.
Okay, I'll go through the list of names. None of you are muted yet, so you can just respond when I get your name. You don't have to do the *6 at this point. Mr. Brockman?
In favor, aye.
Mr. Biller?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Kennison?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if Stephen Felsigno, did he join us? Has he joined the meeting yet? Okay, that's everybody.
Thank you. So the minutes have been approved. Thank you. And we will move on to discussion item number 3 on the agenda, the plans for closing the projected budget gaps from the city of Hartford. And Julian, I didn't think that we had any kind of opening comments. I think we should just throw it right over to Hartford is going to be my guess. The only item I wanted to mention is that, you know, the budget for FY21 has been approved. When it was approved, the secretary had requested, and the MARB all voted and agreed that they had asked the city to go back and contingent on the 5-year plan. They were looking for it to be approved by the city council, and that has happened. However, the secretary is requesting, and the MARB did, that we close the projected budget gaps of the $4.8 million that was reflected in their 5-year plan. So I'm going to turn it over to the city of Hartford and ask them to please walk through the materials that were sent to us yesterday.
Sure. Thank you. So I'll give some level comments, and then to the extent that you want to go into greater detail on any of the items, we're happy to do that. I think, first of all, I want to acknowledge at the start what we have acknowledged both in prior subcommittee meetings and in the full MARB, which is that the gap in our 5-year plan is probably understated because it does not yet include any assumptions for general wage increases, and that is a conscious decision because we don't want to put assumptions in there prior to bargaining. So we anticipate that, you know, having come off of a period of 4 years of zeros for almost every bargaining unit, it's highly unlikely that we will continue without general wage increases. So as we looked at closing this gap, we did not look only at the roughly $4.8 million deficit in the plan that was adopted, but also tried to account for the likelihood that there will be some general wage increases. As you look at what we presented, we listed out first a number of relatively low dollar savings individually, but which add up to about $1 million. That includes continued improvement in tax collection efforts. I'm happy to talk about that. Increased revenue collections, particularly focused on private duty jobs for police. Workers' compensation reduction strategies, strengthening the golf operations, and on continued energy efficiency measures where we have had some significant success in recent years and aim to have more. So again, happy to go into detail on any of those, but those together total about $1 million of what we think we might reasonably achieve in through those efficiency efforts in the years ahead. The next one is a reduction of $2.5 million in the pay-go line for capital expenditures. As you know well, we have not been borrowing for capital expenditures. We budgeted about $10.5 million in our 5-year plan. This is also where we pared down our budget the most in this year, going from 10.5 down to about 6.5. This would contemplate a sort of annual $8 million general fund contribution to that capital reserve fund. It's important to note that we also think that to the extent that we have a surplus this year, that a part of that will go into that capital reserve. To the extent that we're fortunate to have a surplus in any future year, a part of that will go into that capital reserve. And of course, we work hard to get grants, both federal and state, to support additional capital investment. So it does not represent the entirety of our capital investment by any stretch. I don't like reducing this line. I would like to avoid reducing this line, but it's probably the place where we could do it with the least impact to services, core services in the city. It's also worth noting that combined, that $1 million of efficiencies that we do think are achievable with the 2.5 gets us to just over $3.5 million of the 4.8. So it's a significant way there, but not all the way, and we definitely have more to do. The next is just general fund reduction in operating costs in general fund. We talk below about some of those. I think in particular where we think we may have the ability to drop our assumptions at some point is with respect to employee healthcare costs. We've been reluctant to project out long-term trends based on the last couple of years. As you know, we switched from a PPO to a high deductible healthcare plan, and we've had very good cost containment as a result of that for the last few years. And this year in particular, we have extremely low costs, likely because of COVID. We don't know what the years ahead will bring. We don't know whether those trends will continue. We don't know whether some of that cost containment came from the fact that employees were getting used to the plan and were reducing expenditures, but as they build up their HSAs and build up familiarity with the plan, may see costs go up. But again, if current trends continue, we think that is a very, very likely, it's very possible that we will see continued favorability there and be able to drop our estimates. We're also doing a new RFP this coming year, and there may be some opportunities for savings in admin costs, network pricing, and other things. So that's one thing. Beyond that, what's not listed here, but which I think we should note and acknowledge, is that we have every year had some savings from attrition, and those attrition savings have been greater than we budgeted. And so achieving that $1.25 million reduction in general fund operating costs, I think is probably achievable through attrition alone. But again, we don't want to depend on that because we like to budget for the positions we think we actually need. That together would basically close the gap in the 5-year plan. but it would not necessarily close the gap if we have significant general wage increases. And at that point, I think we'd be making the case, as we have in other subcommittee meetings and full MARB board meetings, that the best, most responsible way to close that gap is not through further cuts, but rather through local revenue diversification and new revenue options. In particular, assuming we will someday have hotels filled again, local option on room occupancy tax, local option on meals tax, possible adjustment or expansion of pilot, and we're also looking at rights of way use fees for utilities, phone, cable, etc. So that is what we have listed out. Happy to go through any of that. And then we have down below a more detailed, I don't know that you need me to go through all this, or we can, but a more detailed description of many of those initiatives, particularly the top category, tax collection, increased revenue collection, workers' comp, golf, and energy.
Any comments from the board members, please? And if you have a need for the mayor to walk through this in more detail, or his team to walk through this in more detail, knowing that we just received this stuff late in the day yesterday, and some of us might not have had an opportunity to get through all of the materials,
Sure.
because we didn't allow for that amount of time.
Bob
My
White, Mr. Mayor, a question. Can you explain briefly on the CapEx what it is that you will not be doing in order to reach those savings? And a related question on the operating costs, and I know there were some position issues. Again, what the impact of this on the city would be by implementing those cuts in order to eliminate the deficit.
It's a great question, Bob, and the short answer is I don't know yet. Part of that reduction, often find that the construction schedules we aspire to are not the construction schedules we hit. So it may be that some of that is achieved, at least in the early years, just by shifting things a little bit forward. But obviously, that's not a long-term sustainable plan. My hope would be that we could make up that $2.5 million in the form of additional state bonding support for critical infrastructure needs. I know that that's just a hope and not anything we can have confidence in, but something we, would fight hard for, and that could potentially, minimize or mitigate any impact to our 5-year plan, to our long-term plan. In terms of what projects we would, allow to fall off and what we would continue doing, the biggest expense for us right now is the school construction work that's being done, and that would not fall off. So I think the work that would, be more likely to fall off would be the basic infrastructure work, like sidewalks and roads. We included in our capital plan for this year $1 million for tree planting as well as bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Those are things I think are really important. They also would probably be the things that would go in some of those future years.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other members have some comments?
This is Mark.
Yes.
On the revenue side, looks to me, I haven't done the calculations, but it looks to me like in the 5-year plan, it's about a 1.5% increase annually in that ballpark. Have you factored in any kind of reevaluation assumptions from 21 to 25? Don't we hit a reevaluation?
Yeah, correct me, Bob and Yulita, if I get this wrong. I thought that we dropped our annual increase to reflect the same increase in this year's projected budget, which was like 0.69. So, about half of the 1.5 that we were originally projecting, but maintained the 3.5% increase as a result of reval. That, however, is very uncertain because we may delay reval given the crisis we're in. Bob, am I right or wrong about all that?
I had it noted that the reval was to occur in fiscal 2023.
That's
That
correct.
is correct.
Okay.
Yep. Mary, you
But
absolutely.
but again, that it's possible that would
You
be
might push it off.
delayed.
Yes, understand. Understand.
And am I right about the assumptions? Was it 0.69 and then the 3.5 assumption for the reval?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Another question, if I can, it's Bob White. Mayor, you've talked a little bit publicly that as a result of the renewed interest by many people in income and racial inequality, that perhaps the issue of regionalism in some way, shape, or form may be ripe for a more productive discussion as more people recognize that what you've been saying and others, that having a lot of people who are disadvantaged in one area with very few resources, and the resources being outside of that area, is, at a minimum unfair, and many people would say that was evidence of structural racism. I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts or things that could be done with the surrounding communities, given this newfound recognition, which may or may not last long.
I hope so. I don't imagine that those issues are really going to be taken up in a special session, and I hope that the sense of urgency and need for some more fundamental change persists through the next legislative session. I definitely agree that this is the moment to push harder than ever, and I certainly plan to do that through my own advocacy in whatever way I can. And as I've said before, to the extent that the MARB thinks that it has any that there's an appropriate advocacy role for the board to play, I would encourage that as well.
Thank you.
This is Mark again. I want to focus on the local revenue diversification options that you've listed.
Yep.
Obviously, the other categories, those are basically cuts to the budget to have balance for mitigation, and the revenue diversification are options for additional revenue.
Yep.
All of these are going to have to, any and all of these are going to have to be legislatively approved, as you know, and previously, when these have been raised, there's been a hesitancy on a variety of different policy basis, philosophical basis, as to why they would not have not found favor, at least at this point in time. But focusing on pilot, without any, I've been thinking about this and having some policy background. At some point in time, the full MARB board may have to look at the uniqueness of Hartford and other communities like Hartford that may enter into MARB's purview should they decide to do so. And should there be legislation crafted on a statewide policy basis for those types of communities? Specifically, and I know that the secretary at the last subcommittee meeting was was joking about the stress and strain it would place on state budget. But when you're looking at a community, and let's just say for a second that any community that any tier 3 or 4 community that was under the purview of MARB that had more than 40% of its property non-taxable, have a basically non-taxable base, then MARB could authorize it. I'm just throwing, thoughts out now that I plan on bringing to MARB at a later date for consideration, where MARB could authorize an expenditure of dollars up to the pilot authorization of pilot funds for those non-taxable properties that are not presently under the pilot. For example, quasi-public agencies and municipal nonprofits by statute are not subject to pilot, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And allowing those to be subject to pilot for certain communities under the, up to the, I think it's up to, it's about 45%, should be 45%. I think it's at around 20. With various authorizations, with various oversight, from a policy base, could, at least in statute, create a vehicle for all communities, not just Hartford, because I think the political nature of Hartford is unique, as the mayor knows from the previous legislation that was passed. But you have communities that would fall under this policy base for various reasons, and if the state took it upon themselves to recognize that and create a vehicle for revenue diversification at state approval through the pilot process, then at least from a policy perspective, you have a statutory statewide vehicle that MARB could authorize for expenditure, and the secretary hand out if the authorization is up to a certain level. So I look at revenue diversification as a very real necessity. I think the cutting that you have here is fine, but there's only so many cuts, and I'm not. Well, I shouldn't say I'm not optimistic, but I do think that there's a systemic need for some revenue diversification. We'll get to the vacancies later. So I just wanted to tell the subcommittee members that my thoughts are revenue diversification or focusing in on pilot. That's why I asked the mayor, which I don't have in front of me and hopefully we'll have later, is how much would such a diversification allowance under pilot make available to him at the maximum? And I'm not saying, like you mentioned before, Mayor, would be like $25 billion. I don't know what the number is from a perspective of taxable property, but obviously having the state have to kick in all those pilot monies for those qualifying agencies that I've mentioned is different than I'm thinking. I just want to know what the baseline is to know what the Hartfords of the world are losing, quote unquote, from a pilot revenue process for those quasis, those and those municipal nonprofits that was created, I think, in 1923. I just wanted to let you know that I'm looking at the diversification options as meaningful. I'm not sure that, and I'm not casting any votes in the legislature. I just think that from a policy perspective, MARB should deal with it on a statewide perspective, not just micro on the Hartford perspective. I think that's where we get into trouble. Hartford is unique, but you also have uniquenesses in New Haven. All of our urbans are unique Waterbury, Bridgeport. So creating vehicles from a policy basis that allows them to access, if they fall into certain categories and are eligible, so be it. At least it's there. Otherwise, I think that we're just, as this MARB committee member, speaking only for myself, allowing for an excise tax, occupancy excise tax in Hartford, and then saying, well, do we need one for New Haven? Do we need one for Bridgeport? And we get into this us versus them, and it's counterproductive for the whole idea of regionalism. So I just wanted to let you know where I was coming from, and I look forward to the data that Hartford would provide relative to how much revenue, pilot revenue, would be generated for Hartford at its maximum if it were to be included, if the quasis and the municipal nonprofits were included for pilot reimbursement by the state. I'm not advocating that it totally be reimbursed, but at least it's something to look at for potential sliding scale.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's a great idea. I think, giving the MARB the authority to authorize that, I think is a great idea. I also think it has the benefit of, making MARB oversight, or whatever you want to call it, somewhat more attractive. I mean, my own view is that there are a number of communities that would benefit from being under the MARB process. And I think the more tools the MARB has, both to provide that, accountability, review, and oversight, and also to help solve problems, the more likely, the more powerful the MARB tool is likely to be.
Understand. Do we have other members that want to comment about the matrix that was provided and the details on closing this gap? And if we feel comfortable with this, so that we can then take it up to the next level and have it ready for the next MARB meeting. We don't have action today to actually take on this item, but we do just have it as a discussion item to make sure that we are all comfortable with the materials that have been provided and feel that they would be fiscally sound to be able to close those gaps. I know we have heard about a number of these. I will have to say, the good works that has happened since the last meeting, not just having the narrative, but also to have the table in front of us in the same format with the 5-year plan is very helpful to visualize where the plan is going, and it also puts the package together much nicer. So I appreciate the good work that was done here.
Thank you. And thanks to the team.
So I guess one question that I would have for you, Mayor, is of all of these items, sometimes we put things on paper where we think that they're solid and achievable, and sometimes there are items that would be hard pressed. And I think that you mentioned that the hard pressed items fall at the local level. Other than that, I know that it would be hard cuts to be able to, in certain areas under the reduction of operations. Are any of these items you would say, I call it squishy, where it would either be hard pressed and or difficult to achieve, and it is listed as a contingency, but it might be difficult to obtain. I'm assuming it's that local level.
Well, I think probably the squishiest is the revenue diversification.
Okay, that's what I thought too.
Yeah. Because it's not at the local level. It requires legislative action, and there are only two ways that the state can provide that local revenue diversification. Either it can allow us to take a share of the revenue that's currently collected by the state, which which will be challenging in an environment where the state has its own fiscal challenges.
Correct.
Or it comes as an additional revenue collection option, which we have to think long and hard about because it creates competitive disadvantage for a city that's already competitively disadvantaged.
Yeah, understand.
And then the third would be to do it across the board as a local option, or even a mandatory, supplemental tax payment that local governments benefit from across the state. And that, for me, is my preference. I think it would be beneficial for all kinds of municipalities to have not just the option to do these things, but to simply get the benefit of them. But that's the squishiest. I think the capital is not hard to achieve, but has some potentially, real negative consequences that, although I can't, answer Bob's question and give you the exact place where the pain would be felt, scaling back the capital plan definitely will result in more deferred maintenance and, weaker infrastructure and potentially greater costs down the line.
Understand. Does the city at the local level, when we look at the capital plans, and bear with me as I haven't done this at a municipality level, I've done it at a corporate level, where the deferred maintenance was valued. And when we looked at the deferred maintenance, there were two levels of deferred maintenance. And it was, you want to build into your ongoing as well as in your deferred maintenance, you are depleting your assets. So do you know what level you're at as far as the capitalization? And if you were look at the needs of capital and what is being maintained versus what is not being maintained. I've seen analyses and reports that show the level and a percentage of where your deferred maintenance is at. Like in the corporate level, when we had our buildings evaluated, as an example, they would let us know that you're not maintaining. So we were in financial distress and we weren't able to maintain some of the everyday items, which would then cause this erosion, which then would create much larger gaps to the not helping the infrastructure. So then it turns into more of a crisis mode. Have you ever had like a master plan evaluation that would provide those kind of percentages to understand, are you just keeping up or you're not keeping up and you're behind in the types of levels of deferred maintenance?
It's a great question. We have not done that kind of analysis, at least as far as I know, during my time, and I'm not aware of one before.
Okay.
I mean, I can tell you that we are not keeping up.
Okay.
And we're probably not even close to keeping up.
Okay.
But I can't value that.
Okay. Is that something standard that municipalities do, where you would have somebody come in and evaluate your infrastructure? I would assume it would be something. Is that something you're looking at in the future, or?
We have not. I think it's a good suggestion, and
okay.
Let's look at the cost of doing an assessment like that.
Okay.
And Bob, if you can take that as a to-do, let's follow up. Let's look into the options to do that. One of the reasons what I'm about to say is not a good reason for not doing it. I think one of the reasons we have not done it is that we know that as much as we'd like to know what we can't fund, we still can't fund it.
I understand. But it would be good to know that if within the plan that you're not keeping up is going to cause more issues for you, especially from the capital perspective, when you cannot bond for it, as things are, if they continue to deteriorate and instead of going forward, you're now moving yourself backwards. it always it's sexy, as they always called it in the worlds I came from, to build new buildings and put up new infrastructure for leadership. But for those that do not invest back into the day to day, those items could be deteriorating. And at what level is the deterioration versus the new construction offsetting each other? Jalita, one thing I did not look at, or maybe it's Leanne, from a financial perspective, if you look at your financial statements, are you investing back into, when you look at your fixed assets, are you investing back in to the city at the same level as your depreciation? Does anybody know that?
Good morning, Kim. It's Leanne.
Yes.
I haven't looked at that analysis, but I will take a peek. But just based off of our capital expenditure plan, I would say that we definitely are putting in more than we are depreciating.
Okay. Could somebody just take a look and pull us some numbers and get that for us?
Sorry, I apologize. I don't know the answer to this, but do we depreciate? For example, road infrastructure?
We do, Mayor.
Okay.
Yes, you would if any capital investment that is put on the books as an asset would then get depreciation over the life.
Okay, but are we? Does that mean we're depreciating recent capital investments, or are we actually depreciating our entire road infrastructure? Even with the last time the road was done was 30 years ago.
So, Mayor, a lot of the infrastructure assets have very long lives, anywhere from 30 to 50, even pipes in the ground have 70-year lives. So, the depreciation for infrastructure over the life of the asset is relatively low. So I'm pulling up the financials now to see if I can get Kim's stat for her.
That's okay. If you can have that for us or send it to us offline.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I think this is good conversation. Anybody else have other items that we want to talk about in what was presented? Or Bob, do you have anything that you want to add to the materials or the discussion that we haven't heard yet?
Bob Dakers?
Yes, sir.
No, it's well, again, we apologize for getting it to you a little late, but we're available to answer any questions you may have about it as we go forward with the process. But I don't have anything in particular to add at this point.
Okay. All right, then if we should have any follow-up, we'll do so. I think that Julian, did you have any other items that you needed to touch upon?
No, thank you.
Okay. Then let's move on. I'm not aware if we received the information, and if we did, I probably didn't get it because of our internet going down. Did we receive the analysis on the full-time staffing? Agenda item number 4.
Yes, this is Bob, and so we did send something out on our email. It was probably about 9:45 on the salary savings. So, and again, the lateness, being relatively new, I probably might have slowed down this process with all my questions. So I apologize for that. But I think we did send something out at about probably 10 of 10. So all the members should have it in their email today. I don't know if,
can you, in case some of us, I know I do not have it, so I apologize that I wasn't able to retrieve that. Can you at least, is there a way that we can have a high level discussion about this, even though we don't have the materials, or no, we would have to table this?
Well, I can give an overview of what we have. So we provided, there was lists, there's a summary sheet, but there's also lists. And this is all for the general fund, general fund position. It's a list of positions that are, in a lot of detail about by department, by vacant and filled as of a certain point. Obviously, it's a snapshot in time. So that, it's probably different today than it was when we did it yesterday. People leaving, people coming, and that type of thing. But I think the data we have is as of 6/3, and there's a summary document that would show for the budget for fiscal 21, a total position count, and Yolita, correct me along the way if I'm mistaken, a total position count of 13,092 for the city side of the general fund, and of which
1,300.
1,392 is that and of which again as of this date there was 1,251 filled and 141 vacant. So it's a total payroll of 98,000, a little over 98 million, and the vacancies are worth about $9.1 million as of this time. There are some offsets that we've listed in the summary to those, is that the budget already has assumed 2.5 million in attrition.
Okay.
So we're going to need to. The budget assumes that we'll achieve that level, about 2.5 million of attrition, and then there's another in the police department. When the federal COPS grants, as those come to an end, those folks would roll into the general fund. They as part of our maintenance of effort, they would roll into the general fund. I think in the summary you'll see there it's a relative modest amount. There's 15 police. There were 40 on the COPS grant last year in the fiscal 20 budget. 25 of those are now in the city's general fund budget for 2021, and then 15 would remain in the general fund. I mean on the grant, but those grants would come to an end for those 15 at the end of April. So there'd be a small portion, about 134,000, that we would be picking up. So that at the end of the year, so that would be deducted off. And then the other area that we have a police class of 12 that we expect to start on January 1st of 2021. So those are 4 areas of reduction: the attrition, the police class of 12, and some of the police officers on the COPS grant that we'd pick up for the last 2 months in the general fund. Those changes would bring the salary savings down from 9.1 million down to 5.8 million in salary savings. Of course, in that 5.8 million there's a number, obviously, of critically needed positions in other departments as well, be it public works or other areas. But as of now, those positions are vacant, and so that's the summary. So about 9.1 in current value of vacancies, and then when you take out the items I mentioned, you're down to 5.8.
Okay. Yeah, I double checked just so you are aware. Julian, I don't know if you did, but I did not see that I was able to receive those materials as of yet.
No, we're not getting anything external.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I just so that everybody, all of us know. Board members, were you able to receive them, or no, they came to us and we were then asked to distribute?
I received.
I'm sorry, one at a time. Christine?
I've not received those materials.
You have not. Okay. Mr. White, I heard you talk.
Yes, I did receive them as Bob said, at about 9:45.
Okay, thank you. So many of us don't have those materials. So we'll have to look through those after the fact and get through it. But I guess, Mr. White, since you do have them, do you have any questions?
Again, I didn't have too much of a chance to go through them.
Understand.
The only question is, I'm glad Bob provided the overview. Is on the 5.8. includes some unfilled critical positions. Are there efforts to fill those positions? I mean, given sort of everything that's going on, reimagining police and all those kinds of things, that what are you going to do about the critical conditions, critical positions that are unfilled?
So this is Luke. We are working to fill all of those vacancies, and we really, at this point, I do not think that there are any positions that at this point we would view any budgeted position as a critical position. We have pared down and eliminated positions that we don't view as critical. So I would say every single one of those positions we consider to be critical. We are not intentionally delaying recruitment on any of those positions. That said, we are sometimes prioritizing recruitment among those positions to positions that we think are more urgent or more critical than other positions that are still critical but slightly less urgently needed. So we're working to recruit for all of those. We will continue to recruit for all of those, but we often have additional attrition that occurs throughout the year. And, it's my guess that even as we hire some, we'll see others come vacant.
Yeah, constant turnaround.
This is Mark. Looking at the vacancies, and your decision as to determine the prioritization of hiring and all of them being quote unquote critical or at least necessary for your operations, I can understand. But when there is a person leaving and there is no intent to refill, I assume they're coming off the vacancy list, obviously.
But Mark, I don't think there is no position where we would say there is no intent to refill.
So everything, okay, so let's assume that we have an existing filled position in, I'm just looking just at the top, your assistant director of management analyst. You have 4 listed here, 1 retires. They would move to the vacant slot of 1 being vacant and 3 being on your filled position, if that were to be done again, so to speak. So when you do have a retirement, they don't come off the board, or it's not lapsed. It's still there. It's just it moves into the vacancy slot and to be filled at a later date, so to speak. Is that accurate? I mean, you got a lot of vacancies, obviously. As I look through this.
Right. We do, although keep in mind that about 50 of those current vacancies are police, some of which are actually already in uniform. They're just currently funded by grants and about to be funded and soon to be funded by general fund.
Got it. Well, I don't want to get into this. A lot of members don't have what Bob and I are looking at. And the only other question is, have you within the budget? These are all. There's 1,392 positions. Do you budget for 1,392 positions within your health insurance account as well, even though a position is vacant? Do you budget in your health insurance for positions or people? I mean, I used to budget for positions because if you just budget for people and then a vacancy is filled, your health insurance is going to run at a deficit. So am I assuming that you have, just in simplistic thinking, you have budgeted for 1,392 bodies within your health HSA construct?
Do we lose you?
Bob? No, not me. Bob, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, in part, we probably use, so we have Siegel Consulting who helps with our projections, and they are looking at members. So I think as we do the budget estimates, we have to look at both historical costs, but I think we'd also have to consider, as part of the analysis, how many vacancies we have and how many will be filled. We don't budget one for, we don't have like a one for one thing that we don't budget up by person, by, each person with their health costs. But as part of part of it's an analysis overall with Siegel's help, in which you do look at the number of members. And obviously we have retirees too, so we have to consider that population in there. So I think as we do the overall analysis, it comes into, it's a consideration. But again, we don't budget health insurance one by one, but I guess it'd be part of the overall analysis that we would undertake.
Okay, so you're not really budgeting by bodies, you're budgeting by trends of hiring, of retirements, things of that nature. And CEO is doing a lot of those analysis. Okay.
Yeah, we take all those factors into consideration.
That's correct. And also because if the COPS grant coming on the general fund, we do consider that as well. So we add that cost on top of the benefit budget.
Right.
So we do take that consideration.
Right. I mean, obviously, when you have vacancies, especially within the COPS or the fire or anything of that nature, and you have people that are working that are doing double duty, you're saving money within the salary line, but you're expending it in the overtime line, which historically we've seen within the Hartford budget, but that's the nature of the beast, so to speak. So I get where you're going. I just want to know what your trend lines were, and I really appreciate, even though a lot of members don't have it, the data of vacancies versus filled positions. I think that's very educational and enlightening, at least for me, and a worthwhile analysis. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other discussion? I think that we'll probably have to look at that more in more detail at our next meeting, just to allow for folks to be able to look at the information and digest it. No other comments. Okay. Then let's.
I will say one thing, which is there are some vacancies that we have had a hard time filling because our pay is not competitive, and we are looking sort of position by position at at market comps and other things. But I just want to flag that because to fill some of those positions, we may have to increase salaries, and of course that will also increase projected costs.
Okay.
And I'm not saying across the board. I'm talking about more sort of specialized, particular positions. I'm not just saying, general wage increases for an entire unit, but there are job descriptions where we are probably not market competitive.
Okay. All right. If we don't have any other discussion on agenda item number 4, let's move on to. Did somebody just pipe in, or was that my echo? Okay. Can we move on to agenda item number 5 and get an update on the corrective action plan? Julian, did we receive any materials on that? I don't think we did.
No, just verbal updates.
Okay,
And this is Bob. Leanne, I think Leanne had a doctor's appointment, so she had, I don't believe she's still with us. Leanne?
I'm actually still here, Bob.
Do you want to, I know that I give a little, is that our IT director has been, I guess much of City Hall will be, and I guess, as I understand, a lot of the findings are in they're around the IT area. And So, Leanne, you want to go over her update, or you want, what's your pleasure in terms of, yeah.
So I know that the committee was looking for a spreadsheet of the number of laptops that still needed some security encryption that needs to be completed. So the IT director, unfortunately, is in the midst of opening up City Hall for Monday and dealing with some Chromebooks again for Hartford Public Schools, multiple thousands of Chromebooks. So they are stretched to the max. They did a quick email update this morning stating that there are a total of 164 laptops citywide that they manage. This excludes police and fire because they have their own IT units. Of the 164, 25% have been encrypted before the pandemic started. Once the city resumes normal operations, they will be able to collect the laptops that the staff have been using remotely and finish encrypting the remaining 75% of those laptops. But they can't do that until the employees are back on site.
Understand. One other question. When you mentioned that in the audit, I'm wondering, as you say, that police and fire are separate, if your audit includes police and fire and the findings include police and fire, then even though they're separate, I would ask the city to make sure that that gets incorporated into the analysis to make sure that the findings close. Are they included?
I'm not sure about that, Kim. I can find out.
But
so if they are part of
this is Bob. I did see that that they have their own IT, but they meet CJIS requirements. So I don't know if the requirements that they're following, we can again find this out, may already involve encryption, but they are following. So I assume those are state or criminal justice standards. So, but we can find out. They may well be doing it because they meet those requirements.
Well, Bob, you may or you may not need to. I guess when we're looking to resolve, not that we wouldn't want to make sure that everybody adheres to the right IT policies, especially if it impacts, the city of Hartford. But when the audit was performed, they wrote you up for this as a weakness, that it's important that we make sure that we don't just address the areas that we might oversee, we address all of the areas that they would have had incorporated within the report. Of course, I don't have to tell you that, Bob, you already know.
Understood.
Okay. One thing to note, Kim, is that after Bloom had done this security audit for IT, the IT department actually hired a consultant to come in and do a much deeper security audit.
I recall the mayor doing an RFP on that either in the fall or before last year. I know that within my 1 year cycle, I do recall having an RFP go out on that. Is that the audit that you're referring to?
Yes. So that audit is being done in phases. And from what the director reported this morning, phase 1 is complete and they are starting phase 2 mid-July. But she did mention that audit will encompass and be much deeper than the Bloom-Shapiro audit. So all findings, no matter which audit they're from, will be addressed.
Okay. It would be helpful that rather than having a verbal update, that we have some kind of documentation to include in our packets.
Yes, I asked her to follow up next week with a written summary for you. It's just that she's so swamped she couldn't get to it this week.
I totally understand. COVID is the most important thing as we had struggled with IT this morning.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up question. Is the work being done on the cybersecurity issues, is that part and parcel of the overall work on the continuity of operations planning, i.e. the disaster planning that we have discussed in the past?
From what I understand, the disaster recovery plan is included in phase 2 of the security audit that's starting on July 13th.
Great,
Good,
thank
that's
you.
helpful to know. So could we have a copy or send us something regarding these phases? Maybe it's in that write-up. This will help us in understanding the phases of this security audit.
You got it.
Thank you. There was also on the corrective action plan, I know that I think it was either 2 or 3 items that were relative to IT. Christine, help me with my memory. And I think the other one was Board of Ed.
Correct. It
Yeah,
was the
so
Board
that-
of Ed closing.
And the RFP that we had discussed in order to get at some of the issues related to the special education costs.
Yeah, that is not relative to the corrective action plan. Yes, it is pending, the RFP for special education. I wanted to talk about that one under other business. Okay, Christine?
Fine with me.
Perfect. Can we get an update on the corrective action plan from the Board of Ed? No.
I'm not sure. Did Clarence Zachary join the call today?
He was.
He's the Board of Ed CFO.
Yeah. He was on the call earlier. I guess we must have lost him. Okay. We would need
So
an
he would
update
be the one to
on the
provide
Board of
that.
Ed. I know it's relevant to their policies and procedures.
Absolutely. I'll let him know.
Real.
Okay, then I guess that's all we have for today on corrective action plan. I hope that we have more materials and update in those areas, and that as we're coming down year end right at this very moment, and knowing that these are audit findings from the prior year. As somebody who was a CFO in the past, I know the importance of this area. So I really hope that and expect that we will get some better update versus a verbal. And I am conscious of the COVID environment that we are in, but audit isn't going to stop, and these items will end up getting repeated if they're not addressed. So we don't want to hear further deterioration on the infrastructure of corrective action. So I would hope that folks will take this seriously. As a prior CFO, I always took this area very seriously to make sure that we closed it down. I always looked at it as being a report card in the financial area, and that's why the auditors come in and look at us. I know you guys have a really clean audit, so this is an area that just needs attention. So we can move on to other related business. As Christine mentioned, we are looking for, Board of Ed is not on the phone. Does anybody have an update on the Board of Ed's RFP for special education?
I'm sorry, I don't, if they're not on.
Yeah. Okay, so if you could note that we would be looking for an update. I know that that was drafted prior to COVID, so I wasn't sure if that ever went out or not. And Julian, did we ever get any update on the Board of Ed budget?
I'm drawing a blank. I
am too.
I have to check.
Okay, so the other item for the Board of Ed is we would be looking for a status update on their budget.
Okay.
RFP and the Board of Ed budget. Any other related items that the folks, any of the members would like to speak about today? Or the city?
None here.
All right, should we move for a motion to adjourn?
Mark, so moved.
Second, Brockman.
Second is Brockman. Who, I didn't hear who the move was.
Mark.
Thank you, Mark. And so therefore, we don't need everybody to say all in favor. Let's adjourn for the day. I wish everybody a good, healthy rest of your week and a nice weekend. And thank you for making some improvements, City of Hartford, and your time today.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.